Hello everyone, welcome to SAMIK Digital Lectures. This is Software and Web Development SWD 324 Backend Development 1, and I am excited to be your guide throughout this course. Today we begin with our very first lecture titled Introduction to Backend Development. What happens behind the scenes? Our learning objectives for today. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to understand what back-end development means. You will also be able to understand and identify the key functions of the back-end. Also, you are going to recognize how the back-end communicates with databases. You will also get introduced to PHP and its role as a backend language. So we'll be looking at PHP. We'll be using PHP as a development language for this course. Alright, without wasting time, let's look at what backend means. What is backend development? Let's start with basic definition. The back end is the part of the web application that users don't see. It's what runs on the server. It handles business logic, processing requests, and manages data. Now, an illustration to this is whenever you log into the website, or whenever you submit a form on the website, or whenever you upload a photo, or when you check an account balance, what happens or what goes on from behind the scene is what we call the back end. All the heavy lifting is done by the back end. Now, back-end development is opposite to front-end development. In web development and web applications, we have what is called the back-end and the front-end development. The front-end is different from the back-end development. For us to understand the back-end properly, let's look at the differences between these two components. Now, the front end is referred to what users see, while the back end refers to what users don't see. Users of the application don't see what happens in the back end. Then, secondly, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all these form part of the front end, while the back end comprises of the PHP, which is the development language, and the Python, which is also a scripting language, and then Java programming language, etc. etc. Thirdly, user interface. The user interface refers to the front end, while the back end is comprised of the business logic and the data processing. Last but not the least, the fourth thing is the browser. The browser is used to render the front end, or even during testing of the front end. While developing the front end, we make use of the browser frequently to test, while the back end makes use of the server. So if the front end is the face, then the back end becomes the brain. Now, a quick look at the functions of the back end. Let's break down the core responsibilities of the back end development. Number 1, handling client requests. Handling client request. It processes HTTP request, like from the submission of the API or a submission or API calls. That is what normally is the function of the back end. It handles requests that are being sent from the users. Number 2, managing databases. It stores, retrieves, updates, and deletes data from the database. It also uses SQL or non-SQL databases. Alright, function number 3 is what we call the authentication and authorization. Okay, it verifies user identity during login systems. During login, it verifies user identity. That is what we call authentication, to be sure that this is the user, this is a valid user of the system. And it also controls what the user can do. It assigns roles to users. For example, an admin has its own roles to play in the system, and they are different from an ordinary user. So there is no way you will log in as an ordinary user and then the system will give you access to admin controls. No, that is what happens in the back end. So that's the function number 3. Function number 4 is what we call business logic. It handles business logic. It applies rules like a user can only submit once a day. So such are business logic. It also helps in server configuration and security. That is, it keeps data secured and keep the server running smoothly. All right, let's look at the reason why we are using PHP for backend development. We have Python and other languages which are used for developing the backend. But why are we using PHP? Now let's talk about the language we are focusing on, which is PHP. PHP stands for Hypertext Preprocessor. Hypertext Preprocessor, that's the full meaning of PHP, and it is a widely used open source and scripting language, especially suited for web development. So here are the reasons why we are using PHP for our development. It is easy to embed within HTML. HTML is used to develop the front end. Now, for the front end to work effectively, it has to communicate with the back end, and for back end to work effectively, it has to interact with the front end in order to get the result done. Now, the PHP is used to embed within the HTML tags, and that works effectively. Secondly, it is built specifically for server-side logic. Thirdly, it powers popular platforms like WordPress, Facebook initially, and then Wikipedia. Number 4, it works well with databases like MySQL. Yes, PHP has its quirks, and we will tackle them together in this course. Let's look at database and backend. Databases versus backend. Yes, we are going to introduce the backend's best friend, which is the database. Database stores your application's data in a structured way, like your user profile, orders from customers or customer orders, and then messages or products can be stored in the database. Database can be seen as a repository where data can be stored, or data is collected and stored, retrieved, manipulated, or updated anytime. Now, for management information system, data has to be collected and stored, which can be retrieved anytime and worked upon. So a database is that engine that stores the data that is being collected from the front end. For example, if a user is going to log a register on the system or on a website, he's going to enter his information, and those data collected on the front end or using the form are sent to the database where they are going to be stored. So the back end works with the database, interacts with the database to fetch the data or to send the data into the database for storage. So in this course, we'll be typically using MySQL or similar systems. Now let's look at this. When the user logs in, this is what happens. The back end takes the username and the password and then check them against records in the database. Then if the information is matched with the database records, then the user is given access into the system, or if it doesn't match, the user is denied access to the system, and then the error message is flagged in the process. Okay, how does it all connect? A simple flow. Let's look at a simple flow. Let's visualize it this way. Now a user will click the submit button. After everything, maybe he has entered the password, entered the username, then he's going to click the submit button. Then a request is generated and that request goes to the server. Then PHP, which is our development language or a scripting language, now processes this request and the data is being fetched from the database. It is the PHP that now send requests and interact with the database to fetch data. Then after that, a response is generated and sent back to the browser. Alright, this entire middle section is what we call the backend in action. Alright, so coming up next, in our next lecture, we'll go hands-on and look at setting up local backend environment, installing the XAMPP or the map, and also to write our first simple PHP script. Now let's have a quick recap before we go. A summary of what we have studied today. We look at the back end. I will say the back end is a server-sided of the web apps, and then it handles data processing, logic, and data interaction. It handles data processing, the logic, and then also interact with the database. We also look at PHP. I would say PHP is our main language, simple, powerful, and web focused. Then we also talk about the backend as an invisible but essential aspect of a web application. It powers almost everything on the web. And lastly, we talk about databases. We say databases are, or a database is a repository where data can be stored in an application. Okay, that's it for today's lecture. Thank you for joining me on SAMIK Digital Lectures. If you are ready to dive in deeper, I will see you in the next class where we begin to build our actual backend development setup. Until then, review your notes, explore some popular websites, and then think of what might be happening behind the scene. Thank you.